The daily code snippet. Sometimes you may want to hide label text to avoid redundancy if sighted users are able to determine the label through visual cues. In this case, you can add CSS to create a class and hide the label element. Here is an example. It has a for attribute for search that binds it to the input for search. But it also has a submit button that has text associated with it that also says search. It is not necessary to add the additional text search because the submit button is already labeled search. However, someone using a screen reader would need to have the input element identified to them as a search element. Another way of handling this would be to add an aria-label attribute to identify the input rather than a label element. So here the aria-label for search is added directly to the input, and we don't need a separate label element for our search submit button. A third way is to use aria-labelledby attribute. The value of the ID attribute of the button element is used by the aria-labelledby attribute. A third way is to use the aria-labelledby attribute. The value of the ID attribute of the button element is used by the aria-labelledby attribute. So here we have an input element with an aria-labelledby attribute that has a value of search button. This is the same value for the ID attribute of the button element. Using the title attribute as a replacement for the label element is not recommended. This method has inconsistent support by assistive technologies. This is likely because the title attribute for the input element can be used for non-essential information like a tooltip when hovering over a form field for sighted users. So here you can see that we have a title attribute for search attached to the input element and a button element. Sometimes you need to enclose the input element within the label element as an implicit label because the ID attribute of the form field may not be known if it is being generated by a script. So here we have two input types where we have a first name input and a last name input. Neither has an ID attribute to which we can bind the label for attributes. So in this case, the label element contains the text for first name as well as the input for first name. There's a carriage return, and then you have a second label element with the last name text and an input element for last name. We touched upon some issues of accessibility with forms. What about tables? There are semantic elements we can add to our tables to help identify the roles of the content of our table: thead, tbody, and tfoot. This is important especially when you have a long, complicated table with a lot of information. In addition to using the th element to identify a heading in a table, column, or row, we can use the thead element to further indicate the first row as a header row in a table. This is useful to those accessing your table data using an assistive device. It differentiates the header section from the body or main content, which would be enclosed in a tbody element. Any footer information would be enclosed in a tfoot element. The footer of a table should contain ancillary information that puts the table data in context or may provide additional information to clarify the data presented. Here is an example. So here we have a table element that encloses data for a table that has 5 columns. We have a thead element enclosing the first tr row, which has the 5 table heading elements that identify the headings of columns. If we look at the subsequent table rows, we see that the first element in each table row is also a th element to indicate a heading element for each row. And the table itself displays information about pets. It is possible this is a data table for a veterinarian's office. And our foot element, our tfoot, contains a row that has a table data element which uses a colspan attribute of 5. That means that this table data element will span all 5 columns, and it contains ancillary information that indicates that this is only a partial representation of all the demographic data that are included about the patients at this veterinary practice. This code would display like this. To someone using a screen reader, the thead, tbody, and tfoot elements help with accessibility by identifying the header row, the main content, and the footer of the table. Our tfoot contains a table data element that spans all 5 columns using a colspan attribute, and we use an embedded styling to make the typography display a little smaller. Note, the use of the colspan attribute is not recommended for accessibility because by skipping columns, it can make a user using an assistive device get confused because they're expecting data in all 4 additional columns. So if the information can be presented in another way, it is preferred. Presented by Designers Learn Code.